Hey everyone, welcome back to Cells to Cell. My name is Heem, that's Nick, and our very special guest today is Dr. Keshav Grover. Dr. Grover is a physician by practice, but he's an entrepreneur in other aspects of his life. And we'll delve deep into all of that. So we'll give Dr. Grover the spotlight right now to give a quick introduction of himself.
Hi guys, my name is Keshav Grover. I'm a physician here in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, the Metro Detroit area. I practice integrative and functional medicine as well as aesthetics. Our goal in our practice, Grover Health and Aesthetics, which is the home for both Aesthetica, which is our med spa, and Grover Health and Wellness, which is our functional and integrative medicine practice, is to help people feel their best, look their best, and live their best lives. And so, I think as we get along in this conversation, you'll hear how we do that a little bit in terms of on both sides of the practices and individuals in our team that help out with that process. So excited to have this conversation, guys. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me
that's great.
also. I appreciate the
Yeah, we're
opportunity.
yeah, we're very, very happy to have you. We appreciate you coming on and giving us, part of your afternoon. Yeah, that's a great introduction to Grover Health and Wellness and what you guys do. And going to the website, I encourage anybody who's watching this early, we'll put a link to the website down below. So if you live in the area, go ahead and check it out. And even if you don't, go ahead and click on read and learn. This podcast is all about learning. But Dr. Grover, why don't you go ahead and give us like a little bit more of a background, like about yourself, like where are you from, kind of where you went to school, how you got into
Sure.
medicine, and kind of, just like a fast track of how you went from, being a med student to,
Mhm.
kind of where you are now as the physician entrepreneur powerhouse
Mhm.
that you got going on.
Well, first of all, that's very complimentary because, I still am very much a work in progress. So, but thank you for that accolade. But at the end of the day, I am a human being trying to help other human beings out. That's the way I look at it, who I am and what do I do on a daily basis. I grew up in Troy, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. I went to Michigan State for undergrad, and then I did my master's at the Wayne State School of Medicine. Went back to Michigan State for my osteopathic medical degree. I did training here in the Metro Detroit area through the Michigan State College of Osteopathic Medicine in ear, nose, and throat and facial plastic surgery and head and neck surgery for a few years. And then I transitioned my training over into integrative and functional medicine. Um, and I did some further aesthetics training as well. And then I had an opportunity in 2019 to start my own practice in aesthetics with a partner of mine, who's now has moved on to Texas. And then in 2020, I purchased the practice from him. And and then in 2020, we launched Grover Health and Wellness alongside Aesthetica, which was the med spa practice. And that's kind of the snapshot of where my professional life has been in that spectrum. Um, and I think truly in the integrative and functional medicine world, because a lot of insurances and even for aesthetics don't necessarily reimburse for these treatments as classically, let's say in terms of family practice, or even if I was practicing as an ear, nose, and throat doctor and you were doing a tonsillectomy for, let's say, somebody who had recurrent tonsillitis due to strep throats infections, or sleep apnea or whatever the reason is, you would have, and even in what we do use specific billing codes for our charts in case patients do want to get reimbursed on the back end. But an insurance company will always pay you as a physician based upon what you're documenting and then also what you're providing them in terms of both ICD-10 and CPT codes. And so these are items that help create the robustness of your chart or the visit that the patient has with you, either in the office as a procedure, or in the operating room. And so these are basically how doctors are paid, by what they're creating as billable codes that can be billed at a certain level. And so these are all things that in the integrative and aesthetics world, we're not necessarily trying to create a code. We're not trying to create a number for our patient. We're trying to really figure out, if, let's say, Heem, you came to see me as a patient, we would really try to figure out, well, what are Heem's goals? Where does he want to be in a certain number of years? What is his history? How has he arrived here? what is the day in a life like for him? And I would try to, in our 60 to 90-minute consult for our integrative practice, I would really try to be kind of a fly on the wall and really understand what your a day in the life of yours is like. Then to figure out, okay, what are the laboratory tests and investigations that I would want to get for you? And then what are the interventions to help you get to your goals in terms of both medical, integrative, as well as lifestyle approach to figure out the success pattern of your goals, and then the accountability factor of our check-in processes. And this platform is slowly being integrated into insurance-based models, but that's at a much larger scale. And so as a small business, it's essentially all medical practices, whether you are, let's say, locally here, I'm going to use the example of, let's say, Henry Ford Health System or the Troy Medical Center or Ascension Health, which is a large national, these are all still businesses. Or if you are like myself and you're a small private practice, then you're still a business. So you have to figure out what your business model is and how you're going to succeed in that sense.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that. I love the holistic view that you're taking on in medicine. I think that that's really cool. Um, I would, I think it would be appropriate to ask if you could describe or like give a definition of what functional integrative medicine and wellness is for
Sure.
people at home who might not be too familiar with it. What does that entail, and how are you able to give that to your patients and your clients?
Sure. So functional medicine is identifying the root cause of why somebody has a chronic health issue, or even possibly a acute health issue, or perhaps they're feeling pretty okay overall, but they just want to optimize their health to a certain level to figure out, okay, where is kind of the biochemical evidence or the data that we can see, or even in the history of why there is a lapse in this person's well-being. Okay. And wellness to me is something that is kind of a qualified metric. Okay. What you may define as feeling well is different than what I might define as being well versus what he might, right? And it's almost like taste. Sometimes these things are subjective. Some individuals like sweet, some people like savory. These are all kind of subjective feelings. Health, on the other end, is something we can measure. So if that kind of makes sense in the sense of why we are Grover Health and Wellness as our integrated practice, because we look at and say, okay, is the person healthy in terms of at the cellular level and their organ level? And then are they well? Because you need both to create a sense of well-being, which helps the patient's longevity. So that's the functional medicine part of it. And then the integrative part of it is to say, okay, now that we've identified what the issues are, where the deficiencies are with this person, how do we create the treatment plan? And using integrative medicine, we have the ability to use traditional therapeutics such as pharmaceuticals, surgeries, interventions, imaging, etc., herbal medications, supplements, lifestyle interventions such as even resistance training, walking, yoga, tai chi, acupuncture, physical therapy, osteopathy, chiropractic care, naturopathic medicine. These are all part of integrative medicine, as an example, and including also Ayurvedic medicine too. And so by using integrative approaches, we really have a full buffet, if you will, of treatment options, and to create a custom plate of a treatment protocol for that patient. And that's the way that we look at integrative medicine. And then the other part of the piece is just to also decipher to say, what is the lowest dose that we can give a patient of that intervention that's going to have the maximum efficacy for that person, or effectiveness, I should say. Because then we are also making sure that we are not doing risk to the patient, because that's our first job as a physician, is to do no harm. And if you're going to be giving somebody a massive dose of something that may be inappropriate or that may not actually enable them to start to see results, that's also not going to help their progress. Because It's almost like the concept of if you go to the gym for 2 hours and you haven't worked out in 6 months, you're going to be pretty sore the next couple of days to the point where you may say, hey, I'm not going to go back in that respect. So you want to create a plan that is going to actually be tangible for the patient and that where they can be compliant as well. Because we all know in medicine, compliance is such a big issue, even with things like pharmaceutical therapy or even certain other therapies that may be prescribed where patients do have a huge compliance issue.
So, Dr. Grover, I really liked how you described how taste and kind of preferences are very subjective, but health is definitely something that can be measured. So, what do you do in-house to measure how healthy someone is? So, which procedures or do you just refer
Sure.
these patients to like a diagnostic center somewhere for you to get these lab results?
So a good example of this is, utilizing traditional modalities because they're generally can be also reimbursed by insurance in terms of things like going to, let's say, a Quest laboratory or a LabCorp to get our general labs, like a complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic profile, and looking at micronutrients like B12, magnesium, vitamin D, omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid ratios, advanced lipid testing, inflammatory markers, to see what's going at the cellular level, looking at even testing for hormonal testing or allergy or food sensitivity testing, or even rheumatologic or autoimmune markers to figure out is there a biochemical reason why this person is feeling this way. It's almost like where, and you guys will probably see this later on when you if you decide to go to medical school, but when you have a patient that comes in, your first job is always to say, okay, in the classical sense of how I was taught was, is there a physiologic reason why this person isn't feeling well? Let's say they come in and they have, like, let's say, anxiety, depression, or something else going on mental health wise. You'd want to make sure, okay, is there something going on at the micronutrient or even, let's say, is there a thyroid issue, and kind of help to say, okay, is that something going on or not, and then rule that in or out, and then even evaluate it. Is it a borderline number or value, and how does it implicate with a person's condition or presentation? Then we do advanced functional and integrative medicine testing, including looking at hair, urine, saliva, stool, breath testing for different values in terms of, do they have dysbiosis, looking at their microbiome? Do they have inflammatory markers in their stool which could be indicative for inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis? Do they have markers of poor digestion in terms of their digestive enzymes that are being expressed? Do they have pathogens in their stool that need to be addressed? Do they have a condition possibly like small intestine bacterial overgrowth or heavy metal toxicity from, let's say, improperly removed fillings in the oral cavity? And these are ways that we can test for that to say, okay, there's justification to go after this likelihood of why this can be causing a particular illness to exist or to even be exacerbated in its level, if that makes sense. So we want to do as much of looking under the hood, almost like if you have like a check engine light going off on your dashboard, you're going to take the car to your mechanic. And yeah, you could go to your local Jiffy Lube and they may take a look they may pop the hood open. But then if you go to, like, let's say a more advanced mechanic, they may actually take the car and put up under the hoist, look under it, take a few things apart, maybe even take the engine out and really take on a deeper dive. And that's what we're doing. We're going into that deeper level of the vehicle, which is our body, and figuring that part out. And then we're also looking at the mental health aspect of it too, to say, okay, has there been trauma in this person's life? Have they not dealt with certain issues that may have caused their cellular chemistry to change that they were exposed to, whether that's toxins or, let's say, sexual abuse or childhood trauma or verbal abuse or things of that nature, or even a car accident? These are all events that can affect how our cellular chemistry presents itself. And then we utilize that testing, and then with their presentation and what we get from their history, with their physical exam findings, to put together the plan that that plan is a dialogue, right? In the sense where I can tell a patient, hey, you need to do X, Y, Z. And if you're not going to follow my advice, then sorry, this is not the right place for you. But oftentimes, what I've noticed is that you have to figure out, how do you start that ball to roll, that snowball effect of, okay, how do I see a 10% improvement in my condition? Then 20%, then 30%, 40%, and then getting the person to go that way. Because that's what I think is more successful. That, can I get this person to be 10% better in, let's say, 30 to 60 days after working with them, or 90 days even? Because if I can get that 10 to 20%, then I know that we can get even more. So that's the way I look at caring for a patient, is to say, I can always help someone, even if it's a smaller percentage, than to say I've cured them or they no longer have that problem. So that's our perspective.
Yeah,
So
that's
if a
awesome.
patient,
Yep.
I just
Go
had
ahead,
one
Ian.
question that's like kind
Go
of
ahead,
related to
Ian.
this
Sure.
still. Um, if a patient comes in to you and you get all this diagnostics done, so you have like a whole idea of what their trauma is, what their whole health history is, how they are as a
Mm-hmm.
person, what their metabolic markers are, and everything, like you said, right? And then you pinpoint one little thing that you find is a cause for a lot of their other ailments. And then when you give them a plan to like try and fix that, how often will you call them back? And then how do you like give them all the diagnostics to do again to see how it's done, or do you just look at that one marker that you saw was the bad thing and then you just tell them to go get that diagnostic done like every 3 months or something? Do you have to look at the whole
I mean, it's an
panel of
individual
things?
case. It's an individual case. But yeah, let's say that everything's normal except for one value, or if like, um, we don't have enough evidence to, or reason to retest something else, because also testing can be pricey. So I also like to think in my head that, okay, how do I keep this person more in conversation with me? Because if the conversation ends, then we lose the battle, right? It's 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 one of those concepts that we have to consider, that treatment is not just a monologue, it's a dialogue. You have to keep in dialogue with your patients, because if you're not going to have a dialogue with them, then you're not able to listen to maybe a impediment that they're having to get to their treatment, or to get to their point of health and well-being. And yeah, and I know at some point that can be frustrating for physicians. However, um, it, I always believe it's better to have shorter conversations more often than trying to have a larger conversation less often, which then is less effective, if that makes sense. The concept of, oh, I'll see you in 6 months or 12 months, and let me know how things are going. You've now gone 6 months without a touch point with this person.
That's
It's the same thing with any relationship we have in life, if you think about it. I mean, if you're in touch with somebody more often, and I'm not referring to, oh, I saw their story on social media, and I liked something, or they liked something of mine, that's not really being in touch. But I'm saying, like, truly having a conversation with someone more often, you're just going to know more about them. And if you know more about a patient as a physician, or any healthcare practitioner, or anybody on my team, they're going to identify areas where they're going to be able to succeed, or areas that they may have more issues succeeding with quicker. And we're going to be able to nip things in the bud much faster than if somebody comes let's say 6 months later and they're still diabetic, or their HbA1c, which is their 90-day blood glucose level, as an example. I'm just using this as an example. Hasn't changed much in a positive direction. Now I've lost 3 months of time, and time is our biggest asset that people sometimes forget. That you can you can pay for something, but you'll never get your time back. That 3 months is gone, right? And that's 3 months more now that your cells have not had the opportunity to experience both health and wellness to improve your well-being. So I believe in layering the approach for our treatments and valuing the time process with things. And oftentimes that's where motivation and commitment to the plan also is important. Because if you don't have the ability to put in a daily effort to something, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. I don't want our listeners to think that, oh, I don't have motivation and commitment, I'm not going to be well. That just means that you're not ready for that at that point. Once you're ready for something, to be motivated and committed to the process, just like you both are in your master's program, that's a daily effort that you both have to do, right? You have to get up, you have to go to the lab, you have to study for exams, presumably. That's a daily effort that you have to do to get to your goal to have that master's or any goal that you do. And so that's part of our follow-up as well. And I don't just treat numbers, I treat patients. Because the number is just there to help guide us, but it's not the patient experience.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. I had a question regarding kind of not necessarily like specific cases, but you mentioned something about like anxiety, depression, and mental health.
Yeah.
So that is a very like a hot button nowadays. Is people are a lot of people are depressed. Everybody has anxiety. Nobody can get away from their phones. So kind of what would your approach be to like a patient who comes in who's struggling with anxiety or depression, and kind of how would you pinpoint both scientifically and holistically, how you can help this person in the next, 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and keep touch with them without sending them to a psychiatrist to get put on antidepressants?
So first, I also just want to put a caveat to that comment that you made about psychiatrists and antidepressants. If a person is feeling better on an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication and it's helping their process, I don't think we should discount that, number one. And I don't think we should create a stigma around being on an antidepressant. So that's the first part of mental health care. But I do agree to a certain degree that we have become very much so a pill for an ill nation, that you have anxiety, you have depression, take this medication. It's not necessarily really, take the rug off and see what is all that quote unquote underneath the rug that's been pushed there for years or months or days or however long that's created this problem. And so with anxiety and depression and mental health, we want to make sure that, we're ruling out those physiological items first from a scientific perspective in terms of thyroid, hormone optimization, gut microbiome, is their nutrition optimized in terms of, if you really think about it at your level, you probably are much better at this than I am now. But if you look at your molecules like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, and glutamate, and all of the neurotransmitters and receptors in our brain that are responsible for how we think, how we feel, how we store memories, how a particular memory is stored because of how it made us feel. All of these are part of the neuropharmacology that we have to respect. And if you think about all of these neurotransmitters, what are they made of? They're made of molecular parts, such as amino acids. If you don't have certain amino acids in your diet, let's say you're protein deficient, or you're not getting enough B vitamins to synthesize the amino acids together, because you're not feeding your ATP cycles. Because if you think about your Krebs cycle and your electron transport chain at the molecular level, then you're not going to be able to produce and support the mitochondrial energy that's required to put these together as the neurotransmitters that we need to help us feel better. right? And if they're not doing things like resistance exercise and walking and doing other activities to help communicate through our vagus nerve back to our brain what's going on in our body, because now research is showing us that our brain, our central nervous system, emits only 20% of its. If you look at the vagus nerve as a freeway, you have outbound traffic of 20% from the brain to the body, and you have inbound traffic of 80% from the body to the brain. So what we're doing with our body is also telling our brain something too through our vagus nerve. So in terms of mindfulness practices and whatnot. So to answer your question, we're going to be looking at all of the data from the lab testing to justify, to say, okay, is there a biochemical reason? Even things like, antibodies to previous viral exposures, or did they have COVID? Did they have the vaccine? Could that be an issue as well? Did they have an issue with heavy metals that have been lodged into their fat cells that are causing them brain fog or fatigue? And that's also an issue. And then we're going to be looking at mold exposure as well too. Could that be a possibility in the whole gamut of their mental health issues? And then we have to figure out their history, as I mentioned before, in terms of when did they start to feel that anxiety? When did they start to feel that depression? And when did they felt last well, like where their life was thriving, and where that disconnect is, and how do we help them get back to that point? And that's part of our treatment protocol. And we have our nutritionist, Allison Schechter, which does a great job. We have Sarah Hare, who's our ICU trained nurse, who's also trained in tapping and the polyvagal system of helping individuals with their gut nerve reconnection as well too. My associate, Dr. Arthi Surya, does a great job with this too. And we just hired Joanna Reynolds, who's our esthetician, as well as Reiki and yoga instructor and wellness coach as well too, to help patients out with this process. So we have members on our team that are dedicated to do this, and we work with some psychiatrists in the area too when applicable. We're also looking at I have some patients now that have gone through transcranial magnetic therapy as well. And I think what'll be interesting to see is how items such as even microdosing of psilocybin or psilocybin journeys for some individuals may be applicable in the future, on the forefront of what we're seeing in the integrative space. So I hope that kind of that helps with that.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that was one question that I had, because a lot of people pick on mental health and the healthcare system and how, it's kind of a big struggle. And I think that the holistic approach and looking at everything in the body and not just, send it to a psychiatrist to take a pill, because I know people who are on antidepressants and it helps. But some people don't feel like themselves, and some people look for alternatives. And you're kind of practicing the work you're doing with the team that you've created is what some people might be looking for. And I think that is like the coolest thing in the world. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And I think another comment on the mental health pandemic that we really have right now is we live in a very isolated world, right? Where we are now accustomed to this interaction on Zoom. This is, even for me, look, it's within a hand reach, of where we are. We're not connected anymore physically to one another. We are screen dependent, number one. We are living in this kind of virtual social media reality of, if it didn't appear on my story, it didn't happen. Or I have to, do it for the gram, and things like that. Or I got to record this TikTok video and whatnot. Because we're living in that reality, because that's what's making, people get that shock value of what you're doing in your life. But if you aren't able if you're not able to look back at yourself and say, hey, wow, what I'm doing is amazing and I love what I'm doing, that's what should matter. Because at the end of the day, if you really think about when you see that like, it's not the like that's causing you to be happy. It's the fact that you're seeing that like, and then you're having a chemical interaction in your brain that's causing you to feel happy. So if you think about it, that happiness is occurring inside of you. It's not occurring on the screen. right? Every experience we have as human beings occurs here. I am seeing you here because your image is reflecting on my retina and then being transposed into my optic cortex in my brain, and I'm experiencing that vision. I'm listening to you because of what's going on in my ears into my auditory cortex and being translated from sound waves into electrical energy into my brain. Everything is happening within me. So I'm experiencing this podcast within me right now. And so that's what people need to start to focus on more, is what is going on inside of us. What are we putting inside of our mouths? What are we putting inside of our eyeballs, into our ears? And most of all, are we spending time with this one, with ourselves, getting to know how to be more mindful, how to be more centered, how to be more complete? Because we enter this world complete and we leave this world complete, if you think about that. Right? But for some reason along the way, we are trained by society or other things that you need something else to make your life better. You aren't enough on your own, whether it's an exam grade, a degree, a social status, a credential. That is how we have been trained as a society. We are not trained to say you are complete and you can be happy just the way you are. So we need to change also the social dynamic of how we are impacting our next generation, that it still hasn't been necessarily groomed to think this way. So it's about also the thought process that we go through on a daily basis that makes us feel a certain way, because then that also is the rewiring of those neurons that your brain knows that, okay, if something, it's the resilience concept. If you know that, okay, something doesn't go the way you want, somebody honks at you, somebody says something to you, somebody posts something about you, somebody doesn't meet your expectation of something, right? Even if that's somebody in your own house, right? That is because your brain has been trained to think that it needs something else to be complete. And it's going to try to say, and now when that doesn't occur, your mindset is going to be changed to say, okay, I'm now less complete because this outcome didn't occur the way that, because I'm dependent on this outcome for my peace of mind, right? And that is the thought process that needs to be shifted in terms of how we are truly complete on our own and how we can actually enjoy being more mindful and going more inwards into ourselves. And that's where more of the integrative piece in our therapies come to play, with items such as mindful meditation, deep breathing, even 4-7-8 breath is great, body scans, items such as that, that we go through, alternate nostril breathing, just to kind of be more centered in ourselves. And that's something that I think that needs to be thought of in terms of how do we live in the moment more, and how do we live with purpose? If you look at the elderly generation, that, or anybody who retires, for example, or anybody who loses their ability to move around much, their purpose goes down in life, and that can have a dramatic effect on their mental well-being, and then therefore their physical well-being, because then they stop moving as much. They may gain some weight. Their joints don't work as well. They may have other issues. We know now that a hip fracture in the elderly results in a 6-month to 12-month mortality rate of about at least 50%. I believe that's the number. Don't quote me on that. But we're seeing all these data points come out that show that purpose is such an important part of our lives, and we need to re-inject purpose somehow into individuals' lives that are suffering with anxiety and depression, and showing them that, hey, listen, you are amazing. You have the ability to thrive, and to be there, to be a compassionate coach of theirs through that process. Because too often, I think what happens is that these individuals are left on the sidelines because they're labeled as, oh, that person is not complete. But guess what? Everyone's complete in that sense to me.
That was an amazing explanation of like
I was gonna
everything, and
say
that was
I
like
want to
so,
run. I want to
yeah,
run through a brick wall right now. Like
it was
I'm like
amazing.
hyped up.
So I actually had one question because like, so you had mentioned earlier it's kind of a connection of you saying there's a dialogue between you and your patients, rather than you just telling them like how you should live and everything. And it also has to do with you explaining how your brain neurotransmitters have the basic chemistry of them is built on these amino acids, which all comes from your diet. So let's say you're having this dialogue with your patient and you tell them that, hey, you should get more vegetables in your diet, but they really
Mhm.
don't like vegetables like broccoli or whatever. So do you give them IV therapy? Is that I might be something that's saying completely wrong, but is this where your IV therapy comes in, where you give them the nutrients that they're missing from their diet in through IV or no?
Yeah, so we just take the broccoli, we throw it in a blender, and then we sanitize it with our autoclave, and then we just put it in the IV bag, and then they get it that way. That it's just a very simple process, actually.
Yeah.
But no, I'm joking, actually. But so what what the IV and IM nutrition is really for is more for our patients who have subjective issues or even objective issues where they're not feeling as great. Maybe they just are getting over a virus or they're going through a virus of some sort, or maybe they have other conditions where they need to have a little bit of a boost. And we have a variety of IV therapies and even things like B12 shots. We have a weight loss support shots as well. In our IM protocol, we have antioxidant injections of, like, let's say, glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant as well. And these are meant to help people along the way, but these are not, substitutes for nutrition. And that's where our nutritionist Allison does a fantastic job helping patients figure out how do we get the nutrients into the system, whether that's through a smoothie, can we mask it into, like, let's say, a saute, can we puree it, can we put it in other forms where we can include it into the diet, not necessarily, like, let's say the person who's broccoli averse, but can I get a similar effect from something else in, let's say, the green family that they may appreciate a little bit more? Can we use that in a dish that they're going to eat more likely? And that's why she does a great job of talking about what items people like, what people don't like. Do they like to cook? Do they not like to cook? And she actually is very honest. She's not a big cook herself, so she can relate to a lot of people. Or how do you, like, let's say, take a takeout dish and maybe add some greens to that you may normally get, as an example, right? It's not necessarily like you have to be black and white about these things. How do you take your everyday situation where we are? I mean, we're not all living in this, like, Whole Foods cafe life every day, if that makes sense. People don't have access to organic produce sometimes. People don't have access to farmers markets sometimes. People might be traveling. People might be in a lower income community where maybe these nicer grocery stores or a grocery store in general is not possible to be around. So we try to figure out ways that we can help them get better in that sense. And sometimes even it's something as simple as saying, okay, even if you are at Taco Bell or your Chipotle or you're at one of these more, and these were just names that come to mind. I'm not really using any name in particular, but how do you look at the menu and say, okay, what items on this can I order that's going to help me versus what's going to, maybe spike my blood glucose up more, or maybe that's going to be extra calories that I don't really need today in my diet. These are the conversations we have to really make it practical. Because if you're not practical about it, it's not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I constantly ask myself, do I need to have this much bread with my sandwich, or do I need to put this on a sub roll? But it's good either way.
Yeah.
Um, this, I think, is going to be our last question, Dr. Gilbert. This has been awesome that we have unpacked so much, and still feel like that we have barely scratched the surface. But I want to
I have
shift,
time. I mean, if you guys want to go for a little longer, we can go for a little longer. I have time.
I have
So
I have
I
a
mean,
couple extra questions.
oh, okay, yeah, fine. We've
yeah,
just been recording for almost, like, I think 45 minutes. So I
okay,
just wanted
sure,
to make sure that for him and I, like, we aren't going, way over time.
sure.
And thank you we want to respect your time, and thank you for saying that you have extra time. That's great. So I have a question now. And I want
Sure.
to shift towards more of the entrepreneurial mindset. And, we've learned a lot about the science, but generally, what is it like? Because, we might have some med students or people who want to go to medical school and own their own practice one day.
Ah,
What is it like? And what is it like, owning your own practice and building a team and finding your purpose and creating and following that mission that is so, so important to each and every small business owner?
And my question actually is kind of like related to that too. Is kind of like after you did start your own private practice and you're offering all these things, how accessible are you in all of this? Like if a patient has really emotional connection with you because of how you explain things and it's so good, like if they keep revisiting this, do they revisit your entire practice as a whole? So it's like somebody else, like another medical practitioner, or is it you that's constantly keeping up with them?
so that's kind of a twofold question, but let me answer the entrepreneurship part and then kind of the patient part next. So as a as a physician, as I said before, oftentimes more and more physicians are now employed just because of the nature of practice. You have larger corporations that have taken over hospitals, bought up hospitals, and then these hospitals have had kind of what are called um, they have these agreements with smaller clinics, PSAs is what they're called, and they're and then they eventually, sometimes a clinic might be bought out, and then what happens is that the owner of that clinic may stay on as a practitioner of that practice. And a lot of times this occurs as, let's say, a doctor is somewhere in the middle or to the end of their career, and they kind of want to way out. They want to sell their practice. They're looking for to sell their practice, but they still want to be practicing. So then they don't have to worry about the administrative responsibilities. And what has happened is also over time is that because of more regulation, less of the autonomy of the physician with their patients to decide what they think is best for their patients, and also what insurance companies are dictating is required to practice medicine, and the cost of business itself. I mean, if you think about it, back in the 70s and 80s, when a lot of doctors were thriving in private practice, and even the 90s, um, you had not a lot, you didn't have much that you needed. Even electronic medical records, which emerged in the early 2000s, they weren't really there. You had simple paper charts. You needed a few different diagnostic equipments. Maybe you had a lab, maybe you had an x-ray machine. And if you were super fancy, maybe you had a stress test machine as well, if you were, let's say, a cardiologist in your office. And that was about it. And you were billing insurance based upon office visits and procedures and things like that. Obviously, there were some bad apples in the barrel that were doing fraudulent billing and other things like that, which made it harder for other practitioners to practice. But now, if you were to think about what you need to run a practice in terms of the infrastructure, the rent of the office space, the equipment that you need, the staff that you have to pay, and even staff hourly wages have gone up. And also in terms of electronic medical records requirements, HIPAA compliance, and all the other compliances that um, you have to keep up with. It's a lot to manage and also take care of a patient at the same time. So what has happened is a lot of doctors have said, hey, listen, I just want to work and to treat patients. I don't want to worry about all this other stuff. So a lot of them have gone into the employee model because that's what, and then also if, let's say, you come out of medical school, you have medical school debt, you may not be in the financial position to open your own practice either. Or maybe you don't have like a down payment for joining a group as a partner, because a lot of times if you become a junior partner in a group, you have to buy into that practice, so your buy-in might not be available either. So there's a lot of reasons why people go into the employed route model, and nothing wrong with that model either in terms of the person's decision. So I'm not devaluing that at all. However, that also means that in terms of your economics, you may make a little bit more progressively throughout your career, but there will always be a cap of your economic potential as a physician, and there's a cap of what you can do for that patient. And there's also an expectation of how many patients or procedures you're going to be performing for that company. So as long as you're okay with all of that, or you have to do that for whatever reasons, that's what the employee physician model looks like. Now, when you're an entrepreneur, I can decide because my practice is cash based. So patients pay per service. We don't take insurance. We do accept HSA, FSA dollars, or we can submit an invoice for their reimbursement. Now, if a patient decides they want to do X or Y therapy and they want to pay for it, let's do it, right? If that's going to help them get better sooner, why not? It's their choice. They are choosing their care, which is the way medicine should be, where the patient should decide what's in their best interest with a earnest conversation with the physician, a true doctor-patient relationship. So the other part of being an entrepreneur is that, like I mentioned before, you have to account for your expenses in terms of what is it costing you to run this business, and are you able to be profitable at some point, and are you able to be solvent as well? And then also understanding the marketing piece of being in business, which is a whole nother factor in terms of how do you get your name out? How do you advertise? How do you optimize your search engine optimization on Google? How do you get your Google reviews? Are you on social media? Are you able to connect with individuals? And do things like this, like podcasts. And so this is where that entrepreneurship part of things come in. And I personally love it. And I didn't think I would as much, but I've grown to love being an entrepreneur because I am learning so much along this journey. And I know I'm going to learn even more as I go through it that I wouldn't have learned being an employee in that sense. And also, it's your time. You can decide how, do you want to work 10 hours a day? Do you want to work 6 hours a day? Do you want to work 12 hours a day? Do you want to work 18 hours a day? That's up to you then. You are not you're not restricted in that sense or expected to work a certain number of hours. Yes, but there are also other things. You're always constantly thinking about your practice. How can you do things better? How can you improve? How can you grow? That's part of being an entrepreneur, So that's the entrepreneurship part.
Mm-hmm.
And then the patient question you asked me. So I have my own patients that I see on the integrative side and on the aesthetic side as well. My associate, Dr. Surya, has her patients that she sees as well. And then the ancillary staff in terms of our nurses, our nutritionists, and our and our wellness coach, they all kind of help, both of us help our patients as a whole. And then we have follow-ups to their patients as needed throughout the process. And a lot of times that's even a virtual call, which I'll have with my patients and Dr. Surya will have with her patients. And then our other supporting staff will have their own calls with these patients too, to address the issues that they have. So yeah, I mean, if a person does want to see me in particular, there's no reason why we can't get that person on a schedule at some point in time. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of people,
yeah,
prefer to pick their doctors and are disappointed when they can't go in and see. I know, like my dentist, if I didn't see my dentist, it'd be like really weird because I really like my dentist and he does a really good job. So no, that totally makes sense. But yeah, the entrepreneurship and owning a practice is very, very interesting to me because it almost seems like you're living a double life. You're having to keep up with all the new research and all the new statistics, and if there's new testing and all that kind of stuff, you got to keep up with that. But on the same time, you got to be like, am I even going to have a place to do those tests, and can I afford those tests? And I think that is cool. If you could maybe speak on what it's like to evolve as both an entrepreneur and a doctor at the same time, because that can be really daunting and really intimidating some people, but it can also be really rewarding.
So I think you have to always consider, in terms of what's your job as a doctor. Your job as a doctor is to take care of patients. And if I am able to take care of patients better with newer technology or different technology that other, let's say, traditional healthcare models aren't adopting because of bureaucracy and other red tape that they have, or other agreements with companies that are, like, let's say, a 5-year deal or to use a certain technology, I can make I can switch on a dime tomorrow. Like, I can say, okay, I'm going to use this lab instead now tomorrow because they're better. So now I'm taking care of my patients better, and I made an entrepreneurial decision at the same time that's going to help my business. Because if my patients are doing better, they're going to be happier, and they're also then going to come to me more, whether it's for their, skincare or their facial rejuvenation or body rejuvenation, or they're coming to me because they want to see a functional and integrated medicine physician. So I think, personally speaking, I do truly believe that if you're in private practice as a physician, you do have the ability to do both, to run a really good business and also help your patients the best way possible, in that respect.
That's awesome. I just think
Yeah.
that a lot of people don't, I'm sure some people watching this go to private practices. And like I said, like my dentist is a private practice. And I don't even think about that when I'm like sitting in the waiting room thinking about like, oh, he has to order the toothbrushes that he gives out like at the end. Like he has to
Yeah.
pay for all of that. And no one thinks about that. Everybody just think that that just
Yeah.
comes along with it. And no, it's a really, really tough job. And but like
Yeah, and
you
that
said,
and
it
that
can be
could be a
really
decision
rewarding.
he makes that, and let's say he has to buy those, right? And he's not given them by Crest or Colgate as a sample or whatever. He has to make that decision then to say, okay, how do I optimize my patient's experience? Because if okay, every time I go to my dentist, I'm going to get a new toothbrush, which I can take as a travel toothbrush or something, and a little bit of floss and toothpaste. And let's say if you're a kid, you're getting a sticker or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a win-win. They're going to come back, it's like the concept of like a punch card, or the concept of, hey, you came in for a cup of coffee, we're going to give you, buy 4 cups of coffee at this coffee shop, your 5th cup is on us. Those kind of the thought processes where you can arrange to keep your clientele in your house by doing that, and also then you're promoting their care. Now they go home and you told them brush their teeth and you gave them a toothbrush, you're a dentist, you've done your job. They have a toothbrush, they have toothpaste. There's no reason they shouldn't be brushing their teeth, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you've also taken care of them. So it all boils down to one thing. Whether you are a great business person or a great doctor, if you look at your consumer, right? Your patient is consuming your services as a patient, or if you're a customer, you're still consuming the services of a business. If you're always thinking, how can I do the best possible thing for my consumer? How do I optimize their experience? How do I optimize the value that they're receiving from my business? Whether I am a doctor, a coffee shop, a restaurant, etc., you're going to win, because that's going to help you figure that part out. And even having a conversation with patients sometimes and say, hey, listen, how do you think we could do better for you? Like, what if your dentist asked you, hey, how can we make this experience better? You may have something you could tell them about, right?
Mhm.
So these are all things and that's why they call it the practice of medicine, because you're always practicing. You're not ever mastered it. It's not the mastery of medicine, it's the practice of medicine. So the word practitioner it should really be meditated upon, because you are practicing the discipline of medicine, right? And so that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah. And that's a really cool way to look at it. I didn't even think about call it like a practice that like thinking about like that. That's so interesting. The
That's
last
why
thing,
that's why they call it that, I mean,
yeah,
because you're never a master of it, you're always practicing it.
Always
True.
trying new things, always making sure to always trying to optimize thing. My last question is about the team and team building and picking the right employees. And as not only a doctor, but as a business owner, what kind of things stick out to you, and what made you like kind of pick your employees for like their positions? Because a lot of people are looking for jobs, and it's always good to stick out on a resume, but it's also good to just stick out in the workplace in general. So um, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, how did you build your team, and what were you looking for that could make your business successful?
Yeah, and so I think again, it's a learning process. You will learn along the way, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. I've had people in my practice who I thought were going to be like the ticket to make us hit the next goal that we had, and they totally were somebody different than I imagined them being. Or people who would come on board and then completely ghost you and not show up to work, and leave you empty handed, and now you have to look for a replacement for that person. So there are several instances where you will fail as a business person making a decision on who to bring into the practice. But I think when you get a recommendation from somebody, or you find them from a connection that you have with them, and I think it's also what is their belief system? Why are they working? Is this just a job for them, or they actually enjoy doing this work? And really trying to parse that out and say, okay, if this person is just coming to clock in, clock out, and they don't believe in this work, and they're not willing, I mean, I'll put this very kind of in a kind of a brutal or brute force fashion. I have no issues taking the trash out of my office. I have no issues washing the dishes. I have no issues doing the dirty work. Okay. When you're in a business, you've got to do the dirty work, from the top to the bottom level of that employee structure or of that corporate structure. And I truly believe if you can't be a team player, it's just like sports. If you see the ball, if you see your teammate has dropped the ball, that's okay, but you got to be there to pick it up, or you have to like think, how can I maximize the flow here? And I think individuals that have a connection at the energy level, I would say, like when I meet somebody and I have to evaluate their energy, and now that I'm kind of digitally meeting you guys, my impression, is that clearly it's 5 o'clock and you guys are master's students. You could be hitting happy hour if you wanted to, right? But you're doing this. I mean, that's the truth. I'm sure some of your peers may be at the bar right now, or doing something more leisurely. But you're doing something that is shifting the needle forward for the purpose of why you're doing this. And so that's what you look for in your workers. You're looking for their purpose. You're looking for why they want to come work for you. And then also they have to be good at what they're doing. I mean, you can be a very good person, but if you don't have the skills, then that's also not great. So you have to have both. You have to have that purpose, the skills, and the reliability as a truly good a team player, if that makes sense. You're like, if you're an athlete, you're showing up to practice. You're doing what you need to do to succeed on the field.
Yeah, I like to call it the buy-in method. You got to buy into where you're working if you really want to make a difference. Sorry, Hugh, go
I
ahead.
like that. No, I like that way of looking at it.
Have you learned everything like just from failing on your own, or do you have mentors? Because everything you're saying is like stuff we've also like heard from very successful long-term entrepreneurs, and you're pretty early in your career of like doing all this stuff too. So, I mean, this is like really awesome stuff.
I have there's one quality about myself that I do pride myself in. And that is I've been very, very early on to say, hey, listen, I need help. Okay. And the one thing I've always thought in my mind is, who's doing what I want to do? Right. And how are they doing it? Because if they look like they're doing it well, I want to know that. And even if I don't know them, I have made close friendships through Instagram, for example, that I can call or text on, and that person is going to text me back. I have enrolled myself in certain coaching processes. I have, and then even during training, there was a surgeon that I worked with, a ear, nose, and throat pediatric surgeon. After he was done with the OR, because he wanted the next patient to come in, and this is where he was kind of an entrepreneur because he was a private practitioner. He understood that if he waited for the cleaning crew to clean the room, it would take him an extra 10 minutes of time to see him and operate on his next patient. And he valued those 10 minutes. So you know what he would do? He'd grab the mop, he would start cleaning the operating room. He would take the trash out and say, let's go, guys. Bring the next patient back. Room's clean. Before sometimes the cleaning crew would arrive in the operating room, because he valued time. And these are the lessons you learn from your peers and your mentors and your elders sometimes, or people who have more experience, just by observation. Just look at what is a successful person doing. Don't ask them, just look. And watch what, and when I say successful, I mean a person that you want to emulate, that you see that they are doing things that you want to do, or that you would like to do that's similar to. What are qualities about their life that you want in your life? And try to emulate that part. And someone wise once told me, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them both in that ratio. And also
Pretty
2
good.
eyes and 1 mouth. So the more you're able to perceive, and is going to help you execute correctly.
I love that. That's pretty awesome. And I feel like we could talk more about like a lot of other things. And I actually wanted to go into like NMN, if you know about like the molecule NMN that's used for anti-aging and all of that. But I feel like we should revisit at another date and maybe
Yeah,
do a
let's
part
do a
two of this
whole
podcast.
longevity aging session, because there's a lot to that science that I think I don't want to kind of devalue that process either.
Definitely. And we're all
Yeah,
about that too. We love getting into the science of like we know about like the foundations of regenerative medicine from like stem cells to gene therapy and like how even like pharmaceuticals, like even like small molecules can even impact your long-term health. So that's definitely something we can get into at a later date.
let's do it. Who knows? Maybe I'll learn something from you guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for coming on, Dr. Grover. This has been just an amazing conversation. I know I have learned so much about both, being a doctor in a practice and owning a practice. And, thank you very much. We will have you back on. That aging conversation is going to be awesome. And I know that people will be excited for it. So we just want to say thank you for coming on. And yeah, Heem, do you have anything else?
That's all for me.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you guys for watching. If you've made it this far, remember, hit the like button, subscribe, comment, go check out Dr. Grover's website, go check out Grover Health and Wellness. It's so super cool. And you'll be seeing him soon. So this has been another episode of Cells to Cells. I'm Nick, that's Heem, and that's Dr. Grover. We'll see you guys again.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Take care.
Perfect.